What would it take to arouse your life, to experience more connection, more pleasure, more realness, in and outside of the bedroom? I'm August McLaughlin, and this is Girl Boner Radio. Love one another. Help. Don't judge your neighbor. It's wild how these tenets of Christianity get lost in certain supposedly Christian communities and skewed in really harmful ways. I remember when I was maybe in middle school, I had this youth pastor. She was really hip. She was like everyone's big sister. She had long flowing hair and just seemed very approachable. And so I went to her when a friend of mine came out as gay. And I wanted to support him. And she, you know what, I don't even want to say what she said about him. It was just so heartbreaking. That same pastor also taught that masturbation is a sin, but boys will do it anyway. Same for the whole idea that marriage is the only place sex can happen and marriage can only involve a man and a woman. There are so many layers to the problems with these teachings. I recently spoke to two women who are working to change that because, yeah, these things still happen, and I'm so grateful for their work. Mattie Jo Cowsert and Amber Cantorna-Wylde both grew up with a lot of influence from purity culture and conservative evangelical beliefs. Both women suffered as a result, found their way to much happier living, including in the sex and relationship department, and they have authored books about their journeys. Mattie Jo's soon-to-release book is called God, Sex, and Rich People, a recovering evangelical testimony. Amber's latest book, published last year, is called Out of Focus, My Story of Sexuality, Shame, and Toxic Evangelicalism. When we spoke about their sex and pleasure experiences, their faith, and more, I was struck by similarities and differences. One common thread: they are all about love and acceptance. First, Mattie Jo's story. Mattie Jo's earliest memories around sexuality were heavily influenced by the church.
I always had an awareness of it because growing up in the church, my dad was a pastor. Being raised religious, there was such a heavy focus on marriage and like what it meant for a boy to like you and to be the pretty girl at school. But I don't think I tied that into sex until 5th grade. I moved to a town that was pretty impoverished, which was not that different from where I was before, but the poverty was different and the kids were sexually active. And we're talking kids. There was a girl in my 5th grade class pregnant. You were pretty much guaranteed to see at least a third of the high school girls pregnant. That's when I really started hearing about sex. That was also around the time that I was going through kind of a growth spurt, beginning symptoms of puberty, and boys were starting to comment on my butt and my looks, right? So this was when I sort of became aware of it. My oldest sister had a purity ring. She got a purity ring on her 15th Christmas, but she also had a boyfriend that she was sleeping with. I would defend her. People would be like, oh, she's the pastor's daughter sleeping with her boyfriend. This was a big thing. My other sister one day was like, no, it's true. Chris is having sex. And I remember sobbing. I was masturbating very young. I started masturbating when I was 5, but I don't think I connected it to sex.
Because that doesn't make a baby.
Right, exactly. I knew that it made me feel good. I remember watching some scary movie with my older cousins, and there was a sex scene, and I remember feeling something similar to what I felt whenever I would masturbate. So I knew they were connected, but I didn't know why. I had an understanding that this moral ethic was very hard to abide by. And I wanted to believe that me and my sisters, we were going to do it. Or we were not going to do it, rather. You know what I mean?
She and her sisters would not have sex before marriage No matter how many of their peers were having sex, they would be the exception.
And then when I found out my sister was not the exception, I was devastated. What does that mean for me? What does this mean for my other sister? If she can't live up to it, will we be able to?
And doing whatever she could to stay aligned with her faith community was growing increasingly important. But also, so were boys.
I knew that I was a very sexual being by like fifth, sixth grade. I knew I really liked boys. I was, the youth group version of slut shaming is calling girls boy crazy. I was the boy crazy one. And so when I discovered this whole culture of a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, that because you have this relationship, it changes your heart. And therefore, it changes your entire outlook on life, and it changes your actions, and it changes your entire life's purpose. I was like, oh, that's exciting. Maybe I won't then become like a slut because that's the track I'm on. I literally thought that in like sixth grade because I was so excited about boys.
And she was totally immersed in these ideas.
All of my friends were from church, right? It was like all these surrounding schools. We all went to sort of the same church, and that's where my social life was. I was in church more than I was at sports events, and I was playing 3 sports. It was so much a part of my life. And so that was very heavily influential when like everybody around you is sort of speaking the same language, doing the same thing. It's very easy to develop a faith when you have peer pressure. Like a lot of people, their peer pressure was to drink and to have sex and to party. My peer pressure was, how close can you be to Jesus Christ,
By the time Mattie Jo went to college, her Christian faith wasn't just part of her identity, she said. It was her identity.
I wore a purity ring with pride. I was a virgin. I didn't really date in high school. I had like one boyfriend, but he lived really far away. So that was my workaround to not like be tempted, I guess. And then by college, I thought for sure I'll just like meet my husband and we'll get married and we'll go from there.
By that time, did you have your own sexuality practices? By then, you probably knew what masturbation was, that it was sexual. Did you allow yourself to do that?
No. I think I didn't masturbate for like 2 years. And I remember the day I finally did and I journaled about it.
Wow.
I was like, oh no, I did. I think I was like a junior.
So you felt shame.
Yeah. But, interestingly enough, my mom is not the stereotype of a pastor's wife. My dad is not the stereotype of a pastor. When a lot of people hear evangelicalism, they're like, oh, so your parents are Trump supporters. Not at all. Like it was a big point of crisis for them because they just felt like, how can you follow this faith and follow this person? Like it just didn't make sense for them. And then my mom, though she wanted us to wait until we were married because she thought that was better than what she had done, which she had a lot of sex and partied in high school, she encouraged us to masturbate. She was like, this like extreme thing of like not dating, not kissing, how pure can you possibly be is unhealthy. She was pretty verbal about that. Dad thought the same thing. Mom was like, you should be touching yourself because you need to know what you like. So when you get married, you can tell, right? But it was always when you get married. That's who you're going to enjoy this with. And she kind of told us like it's a stress reliever. Physically for your body, it's good. So she thought it was a good idea for us to masturbate. And so I then didn't feel as bad about it. If mom says it's okay,
Honor thy parents.
Yeah. And then, I started kissing boys. I'd make out with some boys.
During her junior year, Mattie Jo had a sexual encounter with a guy in college.
And I remember really liking the kissing part, but then he, wanted to go further, and I didn't know what to do. He touched me, and I knew that I liked that, and that felt nice. But then he wanted me to touch him, and I genuinely didn't know what to do. And that experience made me feel so dirty that I didn't do anything again for a long time.
The next year, as a senior, she said she had a rendezvous with a bad boy from school.
He went down on me once, and then I broke up with him after. When we broke up, he was shouting at me in the hallways, oh, you taste so good, just straight up harassment. I looked at one of my teachers in the hall and I was like, are you going to do something? And she was like, you dated him. You chose to date this guy. You knew what a bad guy he was. No sense of like protection or anything. And then so I didn't even try. I was like, well, if nobody's going to defend me here. And then finally, another male teacher saw it happening and then ended up going to the principal and he ended up getting in trouble. But like, yeah.
Lots of people thought it was her fault. That's how purity culture tends to treat girls and women, which was one reason Mattie Jo felt a sense of freedom when she went away to college.
I liked the taste of anonymity that I had. I liked attention from the boys. So I made out with a few football players. And then I found out one of the football players had a girlfriend. And I felt really bad about that.
It felt like a purity wake-up call.
I was like, oh, I gotta stop this. Like if I want to meet my husband, because I always thought that my purity was this bargaining chip with God. Like if I'm pure enough, God will reward me. That's really how I saw it. So I did this like little purity seance with my Bible study leader where I like wrote down every guy that I'd ever made out with. We like tore it up and prayed over it. And I was like, I'm starting anew. I won't do that anymore.
Then she met the guy who would be her boyfriend for the rest of college.
I definitely thought we were going to get married. My faith was deepening with him while also in some ways unraveling because I was in the theater department in college. Many of my friends were gay. The LGBTQ plus community was sort of the catalyst for me questioning a lot of this because I was like, how are my friends that I love more than like anybody in the world and they're so lovely and they're clearly adding so much good, they're going to hell because they're gay? Why would God make them this way? And I was just like, I don't think the church is right about this one. But I still held on to purity.
Or at least she tried. For example, with her boyfriend.
We did not have penetrative sex. We made all the boundaries, like we can't lay down together, we can't have the door closed in his room, I can't stay the night. We tried. At the end of the day, we were just really attracted to each other. So we got very close to having sex. One night, we were both naked, and I was like, this is it. This is it. Like, I'm going to do this with this person that I love. And then he kind of had a panic attack and was like, you have to get out. You have to get out. You have to get out. The shame and hurt I felt, I didn't even feel disgust with myself. I actually was confused because I didn't feel that. And I felt like this was just good. Like, this is what it was supposed to be. We're in love. We should be sharing this. Then the next morning, he came in and he laid down with me. And then he shared with me that he got off to porn after I left the room. What I felt bad about is I knew now his view of me had changed. And I had gone from being this lovely, human, fully rounded person to now just a stumbling block. And he was never going to be able to see me as a human being as long as that version of me had been like introduced into his psyche.
She said it was the Madonna whore complex in full effect, where women are either pure and non-sexual or 100% about sex and dangerously tempting and luring straight men, a stumbling block to their own pious living. Mattie Jo felt she had shifted from one to the other in a snap, and it affected her for a long time.
I just didn't think that guys could see me as like a good, full person if we were having sex. I think for a long time, I harbored a lot of anger at him for that. But now looking back, I'm like, well, he was just a victim of it all in the same way that I was. That is unfortunately far too common in Christian communities because men are so fucked when it comes to their sexuality. They are taught that as long as a woman is sexual, she is an object, and they can't marry your full personhood with your body. And so they just isolate the body and the person. And so they would get off to a person on a screen where there's no relationship, right? Because it keeps them an object.
Sometimes that's the only way they can seem to get off or get physically aroused, given the shame they feel about sex with a living, breathing person.
And that is so common in Christian communities. His sexual relationship with himself is so messed up that it's leading to this very bizarre and erratic behavior that if he just had a healthier sexual relationship with himself, he would have no problem making love to someone he loves.
Once they broke up, Mattie Jo's life changed dramatically.
Because as long as I was on this path that I was supposed to be on, which was to become a wife, get married, be able to have sex without fear of going to hell by the time I was 22 or 23, everything was going to be fine. Us breaking up made the reality of me moving to New York City to become an actor or to pursue acting a reality. Because even though that's what I really wanted, and in many ways I feel like God really took care of me, God was like, I am going to pluck you out of this situation because you will carry on a path that is not meant for you in order to live out these beliefs that are not actually divine. They are purely cultural.
Once she was in New York, another reality set in.
I'm probably not going to get married, especially after I moved to New York and I realized, like, oh, no one in their early 20s in New York City wants to get married. What? Like, I was truly surprised. All these finance bros were not trying to get married. And I was like, why doesn't anyone want to be my boyfriend, you know?
Plus, she was an actor.
And that's going to be a lot of instability for the next 5-10 years, probably. Probably not the time to figure out who I want to marry. Living in New York City, I was sort of constantly accosted by all of the ways this absolute truth I had been told was really just culturally true. It didn't translate outside of a very specific culture. And then it was a spiral from there. It was like, well, if this isn't true, what else isn't true?
That is when her sex life would change wildly too. First, she went on a deep dive into scripture research, seeking an answer.
Once I really, really went down that rabbit hole, I was devastated. Intentionally or not, they have withheld so much information from entire congregations. Really big information that changes shit. I got to the point where I was like, I don't even know if I believe Jesus is the Messiah. That reality is going to change everything about my life because my entire life is founded on the belief that Jesus is God. And if I don't believe that anymore, who am I? And that was really when I said fuck it all, and I quite literally fucked it all. Like, I just went on a rampage.
A sex rampage, to be exact, without discretion. Because the religious community she grew up in taught nothing about healthy intimacy or sex.
All you learn is don't have sex with someone unless they're your husband. You don't learn, how do I want to feel when I have sex with someone? Do they make me feel comfortable? I was sort of like mimicking what I thought popular culture was doing, which is like you get drunk and then you have sex and then you like laugh with your girlfriends about it the next day. For like a solid 3 years in New York City, I had a lot of sex that I don't remember. And sometimes because I wasn't sober, but sometimes I was dissociating. I just would leave my body and I would have no memory of it the next morning. One guy was like thanking me for what an amazing experience it was. And I was like, wow, I don't have any idea what happened. So I must have been putting on some sort of performance. I didn't know who I was and I didn't know how to identify myself. And all I was doing was sort of reacting to these old beliefs. I had really low self-esteem. I didn't think that I was worthy of anybody's attention because I was no longer pure. I was like, oh, I'm not desirable. I'm not valuable without these pillars of purity in Christianity.
Mattie Jo started sleeping with one guy repeatedly, and the relationship was not a healthy one. In her book, she calls him fuckboy monster.
He just was super disrespectful to me, super emotionally manipulative. And I mean, I slept with him for years because I was like, well, at least I can like practice sex with him, with one person, versus like continuing to raise my number. So I'd rather sleep with someone multiple times who is not nice to me than maybe sleep with a bunch of different people and really glean something from all of those experiences. Instead, I was just blacking out with all of those experiences and sleeping with him repeatedly Like, it was just a mess.
Finally, Mattie Jo realized things needed to change. She was talking to this friend from college who was visiting.
And I had this moment where I was like, I don't think I'm over my college boyfriend. So much of my identity was still wrapped up in like how he treated me, how our relationship went, how we ended. And I was still defining myself by that.
She dove into self-help books, reading Brené Brown and Glennon Doyle. She made a vision board and started using affirmations.
So I really started to change, what am I saying to myself? What am I allowing in? What am I putting out? What words am I saying? And life started to get a lot clearer. I started to like myself a lot more. I started to get in tune with my body, to meditate.
Then she fell in love with this guy.
He actually, ironically, was very religious. But he was from Eastern Europe, and so his sort of pursuit of purity did not look the same as the American version. But my experience with him allowed me to slow down and see, how do I want to feel with a person? How do I want them to feel about me?
The sex was different too.
We just basically did everything except penetrative sex. I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like, I had not done that much foreplay ever. Sex was not an end goal. It was this like really fun exploratory terrain.
What unfolded next, though, was traumatic.
He goes back to Romania, where he was from. We break up, and I am feeling so good because I'm like, I have this like clarity of my life. I've just gone through this amazing relationship. I was ready to like get out there and date in New York City. And then the first guy I met, I experienced date rape with him. That changed everything.
She did the one thing she could think of to do. She reached out to Planned Parenthood to get tested for STIs.
And they were like, well, we can't test you for anything for another like 2 weeks, but if you can get to Mount Sinai in the next 48 hours, we'll connect you with a social worker, a doctor. We'll get you all the tests. We'll get you all the medications. We'll put everything on file.
So she could take legal action if she wanted to. They'd even arrange for a public defender. She also got a referral for therapy.
All paid for, because Planned Parenthood is connected to all these nonprofits throughout the city that help put this together for survivors. I was like, are you serious? It's free? I didn't take them up on it right away, but about 4 months later, I had like a total meltdown, and I reached out to my brother, and I was like, I don't know what to do. And he was like, did you ever reach out to the therapist? And I was like, no, I don't have a problem. I was still very much like, I don't want my life to be dictated by this thing that I didn't choose, that was forced on me. But I couldn't help it. Like, I had to do something.
Finally, she called the therapist.
He changed my life. I started to realize all the ways that purity culture still affected me day to day.
Her world started opening up, more so than ever before, especially in the dating realm.
I started really dating with a lot more intention and less fear and all of that. From that point on, I had mostly really wonderful sexual experiences. I showed up differently. So I knew how to select and sift through partners better.
And you processed so much trauma.
Yeah.
It's so interesting because without the date rape, would you have even considered that that was all traumatic? The purity culture was part of your trauma?
No. I would have never called it trauma. That would have felt really dramatic. Obviously, it sucks that it came at such a cost. But like, I don't think I would have ever checked myself into therapy if it didn't happen, if I wasn't like forced to a rock bottom,
Yeah. Mattie Jo's book, God, Sex, and Rich People, explores her first 3 years of excavating her faith before all that. While she no longer considers herself religious, she has maintained her faith.
I do still believe in God. I don't consider myself a Christian because I don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah. I think a lot of it is symbolism.
Fortunately, she has been able to maintain good relationships with her family. something that, as you'll hear in the next story, isn't always possible. Her relationship with herself and her sexuality, with intimacy, they've all evolved too. Where are you now in terms of your relationship with your body and your sexuality and pleasure in general?
So I'm partnered now. So I'm figuring out how to navigate pleasure within a relationship that I've mostly not done within a relationship. I've mostly been single. It's just different, right? When you are living with someone and there's other obstacles to get over to have a sexual experience that feels sexy, because like saying, "Can you please just vacuum?" is not sexy. And then that like leads to the bedroom, right?
I suppose it depends on how you vacuum. Seriously, though, I think it's awesome that she talks openly about very real and common scenarios. Here's another example. It's one I hear a lot.
This is something that I find very difficult. In my relationship, I am the more sexually driven one. We're so like affectionate. I'm so attracted to him. He's so attracted to me. He's always touching my butt or always holding hands. That doesn't mean that we want to have sex at the same time. It doesn't mean that we have time for sex even when we both want it at the same time. Like it doesn't mean that we both have similar speeds in terms of libido. Like it's not the same. It's so different, so individual, like you were saying. I am very passionate about sort of dispelling these stereotypes around sexuality. I think I'm actually in the perfect position to be the one in our relationship leading us sexually because of everything I've gone through. I think that makes sense that I'm sort of the one who has to like facilitate. I feel like one thing that I learned to do really well with straight men is give them the container to completely relax and feel safe to express themselves sexually. When it comes to sex, men are just expected to perform. Get an erection, do a good job, perform well. But what about his emotions in all of this? Well, sex isn't supposed to be emotional for men. And it's like, how does he feel around you? Like, does he feel safe? Again, like all these questions. I feel like I've learned how to do that with straight men. And therefore, I've had really great sexual experiences with them because they can relax and they can just feel comfortable being themselves. And if they don't come or if they can't get hard for whatever anxiety is going on, it's okay. I'm like, that's fine. That's fine. Let's do it another time when you're ready. Do you want to talk about something? That's something from tuning into my own body and my own feelings. I can do that with partners better.
And that's been its own learning curve.
I remember one session with my therapist, I was telling him, like, I have a hard time telling men what I need in the bedroom. And he was like, what would you have a hard time saying if you were going to give me an example? And I was like, and I was kind of quiet. And he was like, okay, so like from a spectrum of like basic clitoral stimulation to like being swung from a ceiling fan, where does it fall? And I was like, definitely closer to the clitoral stimulation. And he was like, well, when you came into this office today, you went on like a whole diatribe about your singing voice and like raising the soft palate and the larynx. You can talk about the anatomy of your throat very comfortably. What makes your vagina, vulva, clitoris, what makes any of that different? And I was like, oh my God, great question. I was embarrassed by it. And I thought like, if I express this, he's going to think I'm difficult. And some men will be that way. You don't fuck those guys, right? If they show that, you say, okay, I'm done. But like, we're so afraid to even share it when in reality, most of my experiences when I've said, hey, can you do this? Or like, they love it. They love that. That shows that you're with someone who's excited about your pleasure.
Did you know that sex toys can make orgasms last longer? They also make big O's more likely if you've struggled in that department. Whether you use a toy alone or with a partner, I highly recommend having at least one that you love. If you want to stock up on toys or your favorite lube or get a really fancy designer one, you can get free, always discreet shipping on orders over $75 at The Pleasure Chest. Simply head to thepleasurechest.com and search by category for vibrators, strap-ons, kink accessories, toys for couples, and more. Basically, you can build your own pleasure chest by shopping at thepleasurechest.com. Now, Amber's story. Amber Cantorna-Wylde says her childhood was, in many ways, quintessential, one full of happy memories.
Whether that was summer trips that we took back to Montana to see our relatives or the traditions that we held around the holidays, I have a lot of fond memories around things in the fall specifically, like the Great Pumpkin Dinner and things that we would do to gather people.
She had the same group of girlfriends from second grade through high school, and they really looked up to her, which was cool in some ways, but it also brought a sense of pressure.
Even in the elementary years, there were certain things where I was kind of expected to be that role model and expected to kind of lead the way for the other girls in terms of behavior and etiquette. Over time, it kind of wore on me. The pressure of trying to uphold the family name of what my dad did and who my mom was.
Her dad was an executive at Focus on the Family, a Christian fundamentalist organization founded in the 70s by James Dobson, based in Colorado Springs. And her mom was well known in the homeschooling community.
And I started feeling like I was wearing a mask a lot and not able to really be who I was because I was always trying to uphold who I was supposed to be.
All of that impacted Amber's mental health, something she writes about in depth in Out of Focus. Her mental health took a turn for the worse when she endured abuse. And then, later, she had a pivotal conversation with her mom.
When I was young, I had an incident of what we now know as like child-on-child sexual abuse. My neighbor was being abused by his babysitter and then kind of passing on those sexual acts to me. Of course, I didn't have terms or language around what that was and what was happening. You didn't talk about those things. I knew enough to know it was wrong, and I knew enough to feel shame about it and that I was supposed to hide it. And I think I did a good enough job to kind of suppress those memories until I was 9 years old, when suddenly it all comes flooding back to me.
Amber gathered up her courage and shared that super vulnerable information with her mom.
She ended up basically brushing it under the rug and being like, well, kids experiment, that happens sometimes. That moment of invalidating my feelings really set the precedence of how our relationship developed from there on out, because I learned that my feelings didn't matter, really impacted my ability to trust my mom. I don't think that we ever were really able to repair that.
At 13, Amber took her purity vow. And like Mattie Jo, she started wearing a purity ring. She told me she was always searching for someone who could see past her smile to what was really happening, that she was crumbling underneath.
At 13 years old, I didn't know any different. I didn't know any better. That was how I was raised. It was what I was supposed to do as a good role model. It was what I was supposed to do to please God. And of course, I wanted to please God because that was who I was. It was this big coming of womanhood ceremony at my 13th birthday where all my family and, relatives were there and my friends. I signed on the dotted line, this covenant, and had this purity ring that my dad put on my wedding finger that I was supposed to wear until the day that I got married to a man.
Amber bought into those ideas for a decade until she fell in love with her female college roommate. That's when she had what she called her epiphany of horror. Because of all the rules that she grew up around, being gay was one thing she was especially not supposed to be.
In a way, like my ability to come into who I truly was, as a queer woman was stolen from me because not only did I not have the exposure to the queer community or the vocabulary to put with what I was feeling, but I also was deeply involved in purity culture and this belief that if I just made all the right choices and pleased God with my life, this knight in shining armor would come in on a white horse and sweep me off to happily ever after. Spoiler alert, that's not what happened.
In her book, Amber talks about 3 rules she learned about sex. Number 1, do not engage in sex before marriage.
And that was just expected. They even took it a step further into like courtship and saying that, even kissing before your wedding day or holding hands or any kind of intimacy was wrong.
When you got married, she said, you were supposed to just suddenly know how to get busy with your spouse, doing this thing that was taboo and wrong in your life until literally the moment before then. Sex rule number 2, do not touch yourself down there.
I would say that was very strongly implied. I think it was more directly spoken about and taught to the boys. Girls, I think it was more focused on purity, but it was there. That subliminal message was there.
And assumed that you wouldn't masturbate.
Yeah.
As though female desire and pleasure didn't exist. Sex rule number 3 went like this. Do not put yourself in a compromising position where you may be tempted to go too far with the opposite sex.
That was strongly put on the females as well.
It was up to the girls and women to, quote, not do something stupid and end up in a bad place.
Whether that was like checking your car before you got into it at night, or making sure you didn't stay too late, or your skirt being too short, your neckline being too low, any of these things that could tempt the boys. It was like you were responsible for their reaction to however you dressed or however you presented yourself.
Because Amber was gay, though didn't realize it yet, and so deep in purity culture, she never dated.
I never even got to that point of like, do we hold hands or do we not? Do we kiss or do we not? I just kept believing that I was doing the right thing by serving God with my life. And then I would watch my friends date and break up and date and break up. And I'd be like, oh, that's so sad for them. God must just be saving me from all this heartache because I'm making the right choices. I was just so far removed from my own sexuality and my own desire.
Until she developed feelings for that college roommate, Brooke. In Out of Focus, she wrote about having a mix of emotions at that time.
I was, on one hand, deeply in shame because not only was I exploring sexuality before marriage, but I was doing it with a female. But then juxtaposed to that was this feeling of coming alive for the first time and feeling my body come alive in ways that I didn't even know were possible. So it was very complicated to experience love for the first time, but have this internal knowing based on how you were raised that that love was bad. And I remember us questioning frequently, like, how can love be bad? Like, this feels so good. I feel so happy. It feels so right. How can this be bad? Just feeling like you're at constant war within yourselves.
Those complicated feelings and the ideas that had been so deeply ingrained in her for so long led Amber to try to be straight, she writes, with a young man named Darius. If she was going to be gay, she told me, it wasn't going to be for a lack of trying, something her faith seemed to demand of her.
Well, at least I'll say that I tried and gave it my best, right? And so I did some online dating, basically, is how I met Darius. We kind of saw each other for, a short period of time. I ended up giving him my male virginity, the piece that was like built up to be the gold.
And yet, with Darius, it seemed like no big deal.
I remember feeling so deceived and so let down by the religion I had been raised in, because I was like, I've waited all my life for that. It just felt so meaningless to me. There was such a drastic difference between this whole sexual experience that I had with Darius and the simple kiss that I had with a woman, that it was obvious in my mind, like the light bulb was coming on and like something is different here.
That was a turning point that helped her embrace her sexuality. Sometime after, as you may recall from Amber's coming out story in a past episode, she told her parents about her identity. Devastatingly, they disowned her.
They compared me to murderers and to pedophiles. They said, we feel like you've died. How selfish of you to do this to our family. My mom even took a list of the traits that I had written that I was supposed to want in a husband and kind of threw them at me. It was like, can you tell me if you met a man with these characteristics, you wouldn't want to marry him?
They backed Amber into a corner with accusations she was not equipped to deal with. Then they asked her for her house keys back, so she couldn't freely stop home anymore.
And so our whole relationship just took a very swift turn and it never recovered. We had a period of maybe a year and a half to 2 years where we had very awkward interaction. It just became more and more toxic. there was a point where my dad just drew a line in the sand and was like, I'm done.
That was October of 2014. They haven't spoken since. Amber went on to find an affirming faith community in Denver where she could love God and be accepted for her true self. She credits that for saving her life.
When I talk to people who are considering coming out, it's one of the biggest things I recommend is, if at all possible, to build that community up ahead of time so you have them to lean on through the process, because it just makes such a difference when you don't know what the outcome is going to be, to know that you have a community to lean on.
Since then, Amber has healed and grown so much in all areas of her life. What can you share about your journey with sex and pleasure since kind of your healing process began?
I think that's been one of the most beautiful things about the journey, is taking off all that shame. Because it wasn't only shame with my sexuality, it was shame about so many aspects of life. And so to be able to finally come out of that and to let go of certainty, which was kind of the bedrock of like, we are right and everyone else is wrong, was really, really scary. But I think it was also one of the most freeing aspects of the process, was to be able to allow space to wonder and to doubt and to question. And I think that started with my faith. That affirming faith community that I found allowed space for those things. It allowed space for questions and for doubt and for wonder. Then in time opened the door to do it with sex and with different aspects of life as a whole. To this day, that's probably one of the things I'm most grateful for, is just that unburdening of shame and the freedom to talk about sex and to talk about all these different aspects of life without shame riddled to it, without shame attached, and know that it's okay to explore and it's okay to talk about and it's okay to ask questions and it's okay to wonder or to try new things. But when you start talking with your friends and having conversations about sex, it strips the shame and the power out of it. And you realize, like, we're all experiencing similar things. And it's very normal.
And she wants others to experience that kind of freedom and healing.
I think one of the biggest things I always tell people is to love who you are. You are worthy of love and belonging. To allow yourself the space to wonder and to question and to explore and to try new things without feeling riddled by shame, without feeling like there's something wrong with you or there's something broken or there's something that needs to be fixed or hidden away. Embracing who you are and embracing your sexuality, because it's a beautiful gift to the world and it's a gift to you.
The advice Mattie Jo wanted you all to hear might just help you do that.
To the best of your ability, tune into yourself and get really good at like internal excavation. Because I just think so often in our journey, we have a thought and we just take it as truth without really investigating it and like pulling it apart. And I think being able to do that, learning how to do that, was so helpful in my having quality dating and sexual experiences.
Amber saw her chance to write her latest book as a gift, one that gave her the chance to rewrite her story following her first memoir from years ago and infuse it with the years of growth and learning and advocacy she's cultivated since. Learn more and order her book via ambercantorna-wylde.com. To start deconstructing messaging you received around purity culture, religion, sex, and relationships, Mattie Jo suggests visiting the resource guide on her blog, where you can also explore her stories. Sign up for her blog and get updates about her book at mattiejocowsert.com. And if you're enjoying Girl Boner Radio, I would so appreciate it if you would copy a link to this episode or any of your favorites and send it out to your friends. You can also support the show with a rating or review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or iTunes. Thank you so much for listening.